Hi guys, my name is Vivek and in this video tutorial we are going to talk about list partitioning in Oracle. Guys, if you have not seen my first two videos on partitioning, I will highly recommend that you pause this video right now and go ahead and finish those two videos first. In those two videos I have explained what is partitioning, what are its advantages with multiple real project examples, and I have explained the performance basics which will actually help you understand that if you have huge amount of data, how exactly partitioning improves your performance and makes the entire process more manageable and available. Once you have completed those two videos, I assure you that you will be able to appreciate the beauty of this video in a much better manner. So let's get started and discuss today's contents. So today we are going to discuss about partitioning key, and then we will discuss about list partitioning and its basic. Then we will talk about an error that you may encounter if you try to insert some data that does not belong to any partition. Then we will talk about how we can actually rectify that using default partitioning. Then we will talk about when we should use list partitioning and why. We will discuss that with couple of real world examples. The first one will be region wise partitioning, and as I have mentioned in my previous tutorial that along with partitioning you can still go ahead and use all the basic Oracle concepts. You can create index, so we will understand what are local and global index and what kind of index should be created in which scenario. There are certain challenges, we are going to discuss that as well, and how Oracle 12c actually plans to tackle that. We will discuss that in a later video. Then what I will do is I will give you a real problem statement and I'll ask you to pause for a moment and think about the solution, and then after that I'll give you the solution to that particular approach, and that will be under the title batch ID partitioning. So let's quickly go ahead and discuss about partitioning key. So as we have done in our previous tutorial, we are going to again discuss that with the table transaction demo. So I have 5 standards columns for my table transaction demo, and this example pertains to a retail organization that is operating in Asia Pacific, Europe and Middle East and North America. So you must be well versed with this syntax as of now, where we are just creating the table. But along with that, we have this syntax that's actually telling Oracle that we want to partition this table by list. So here this particular keyword, it actually tells Oracle that the table transaction demo is to be list partition, and on which key it has to be partitioned, that comes under brackets. So we are partitioning this particular table on the basis of the region. If the value of region is AP, it should go into partition P underscore AP. If the value is EMEA, it should go and get stored in P underscore EMEA, and for NA it should go ahead and get stored in P underscore NA. So what exactly will happen if I go ahead and run this in my Oracle? As soon as I go ahead and run this, Oracle is going to create 3 different partitions or underlying 3 different segments which are totally exclusive. So as soon as I try to insert my first row, which will belong to Asia Pacific region, it will know that it has to go ahead and store that row in this particular partition or this particular segment on my disk. If I try to insert a row that belongs to North America, it will go ahead and store it here. So if I have to explain in layman terms what exactly is the partition key, in our current example our partition key is region, and it actually helps us uniquely identify how each row should be mapped to which partition. What does that mean? So I'm trying to insert 10 rows that actually belongs to EMEA region. I've received a file. It will explicitly know as soon as it sees the region as EMEA that it's going to go ahead and insert in this particular partition or segment. So just to rephrase, partition key helps us unambiguously store the data in a particular partition with the help of key. So we already know that, alright, if the data is AP, it should go to this segment. If the data is if the region is EMEA, this particular segment. Now what happens if the user tries to insert a data that does not belong to any of three partitions? So instead of specifying AP, EMEA or North America as region, I instead try to insert the data for India. So here what I'm doing is I'm trying to insert a row in my transaction demo 1 where instead of region as Asia Pacific, EMEA or NA, I've specified IND, which actually represents India. So now in this scenario, Oracle gets confused. It does not understand to which partition it should send the data that belongs to IND region, because I have not specified any such partition. So it's going to throw me an error saying that inserted partition key does not map to any partition. So here is an important thing to note, guys. You should use list partitioning when you already have a predefined set of values for which you expect the data. In our case, we already know that, alright, we have three regions where we are doing business. IND actually is not a region but a country that actually falls under AP. So this is bad data. Now it depends on my use case what exactly I want to do with it, whether I want my process to fail or whether I want to store this data and reanalyze it later for issues. So if I want that my process should not fail, what I can do is I can introduce a default partition. So here if you see, the entire syntax is same, but in the last line I have added another partition, p underscore region underscore unknown, with the values as default. So now what will happen if I enter a row that does not belong to the region AP, EMEA or North America? It will go ahead and get stored in this particular partition and my process will not fail. Then I can do my reject analysis on this particular partition to identify the bad data, and I can go ahead and rectify it. So now that we understand like what's the partitioning key, how do we deal with the error, and how we can rectify that, what is default partitioning, let's try to understand when and why we should use list partitioning. So the first reason is it stays the same. If your data set is huge, if the data set is above 2 GB, it's a contender for partitioning. That will stay consistent for all list, range and hash or composite partitioning. Your table has to be sufficiently huge to be considered for partitioning. You should consider using list partitioning when you have a predefined set of discrete values using which you can group and organize unordered and unrelated sets of data in a natural way. Now what does that mean? So I am the warehouse manager of the retail organization, and there are three managers, one each for a single region, and they don't care about the data from the other two regions. So Asia Pacific manager only wants to see the details of his data, and that's the beauty of partitioning. As soon as he goes ahead and write the query, selects all from transaction demo where his region is equals to Asia Pacific, he doesn't even have to access these two segments or partition. He can avoid almost 66% of the data and can directly access data only from his partition, which will save him significant amount of time. So if I already have a predefined set of discrete values, like in this particular case, I already know that I can have only three regions where I'm doing business. It's Asia Pacific, EMEA or North America. So I know that beforehand, and I want to do a lot of aggregations to see what's the profit generated for this particular month, for this particular quarter, for this particular year, and I want to compare that with my previous years to see how the average growth is going and that kind of stuff. And the regional manager, they have to do it only for their section or their region. So in that case, list partitioning is very effective. And if you have seen my previous tutorials, I've explained that partitioning goes well with all the Oracle concepts. So you can still go ahead and create indexes and stuff. and we will, as we progress further in this video tutorial, we will understand what are local and global index in context of partitioning. So if you plan to access medium data aggregations on a frequent basis that are being done on the partition key column, for example, in our case is the EMEA manager, he wants to access the entire data for a particular month, instead of accessing the entire transaction demo table using full table scan, we can partition the table using region, and that will be very fast. Let's quickly recap what we have learned as of now through a slightly different scenarios. So here we have the transaction demo table, but instead of region we have country. Now we are partitioning by list, and the partitioning key here is country. We still have the same three partition: AP, EMEA and North America. The country that belongs to AP is India, China, Japan, Singapore and Australia. To EMEA, UK, Amsterdam, Ireland and Norway. And to North America, USA, Canada and Mexico. So as soon as I execute this statement, what will happen? It will create three different partitions logically or physically on the storage disk. We will have three different segments. For Asia Pacific, where the value of the country is India, China, Japan, Singapore and Australia, all those rows with these values will be stored in this particular partition or this particular segment. And similarly for EMEA and North America as well, when we have USA, Canada or Mexico, that will go to North America partition or segment, and for UK, Amsterdam, Ireland or Norway, it will go to EMEA partition. Now we have discussed that indexes still go along well with the partition tables. Let's see what are the types of index and what type of index should be created in what cases. So we have two index, local and global index. When the indexing key is same as the partition key or it's a subset of the partition key, then we should go ahead and create local index. So for example, here if I'm creating a bitmap index on my country, so my partitioning key is country, and if I want to create a bitmap index on that, it should be a local index. And if I want to create an index on transaction ID or transaction date, then that particular index will be global index. So the basic thing is, if the index is created on the partitioning key or a subset of it, a local index should be created. Now when we drop the partition, the local index can be easily dropped along with it. But if we are creating an index that is on a column not part of the partitioning key, like in our case transaction ID or transaction date, then a global index should be created. Now there is a slight challenge associated with it. For example, for some reason I stopped doing business in Asia Pacific. If that's the case, I don't want to maintain that particular partition anymore. If I decide to go ahead and drop that particular partition, my two global index on transaction ID and transaction date will become unusable. Now my queries will start performing very poor for these two index. How I can tackle that, we will learn a little later. Now let's go ahead and understand our second example, and I want you guys to pause for a moment after I explain the problem statement and think on your own what best solution can you come up for this particular problem statement. So as I mentioned, I'm a retail organization which is operating in all three regions. Now I am receiving almost 500 files on a daily basis. My problem statement is, I need to store and process these files effectively and push them to my warehouse after doing ETL. Now I have to retain this data in my staging and processing table for 14 days for verification, and after that I need to delete or drop this data. Now let me explain this in layman language. So I have data coming from India, from United States, from Mexico, from Canada. So let's say India sent me some files and it said that for a particular day it did sell for $100,000. But when I stored the data in my warehouse, I found out the revenue I got from India was $120,000 instead of $100,000. Now, in order to understand that gap of $20,000, I need to retrieve the data from the file for that particular day for verification purpose. So I need to maintain the data in my staging and processing table for the last 14 days, and after that I can either delete the data, or I can, if I create partitions, I can drop those partitions. So at this moment I want you guys to pause for a moment, reread it couple of times, go back to your drawing board and try to design a solution. So hopefully you gave a thought and you came up with something. This can be done using numerous ways. I will give you one example where I saw that it was implemented effectively. So we have this transaction demo table. This is a staging table, and what we have done is we have partitioned this table by list using batch ID. So we have created 3 partitions here with values 1, 2 and 3. And what we will do is, as we will receive files, we will create these partitions on the fly. Let's see how. So here is my solution. Since the data and file structure is similar for all the files, what I'm going to do is I'm going to design a single process to load the entire data. So we will have 3 important components here. The staging table. Then I will have the medium layer where I'll do my ETL. It may be one table or multiple tables where I will clean my data. And then finally I will load this into my warehouse. So what I will do is I will partition my staging tables and my middle level tables where I'm doing all the cleansing on the basis of batch ID. So if I'm loading 500 files on a daily basis, I'm going to dynamically create 500 partitions on all my tables. And creating so many partitions on so many tables might sound unrealistic, but I've actually implemented this, or I've actually seen this being implemented in multiple projects where it was working very efficiently. So what I will do is maybe I will create a weekend process that will partition, that will generate partitions for my table on a weekly basis. So if I'm expecting 500 files on a daily basis, maybe I will create 3000 partitions in advance over the weekend, and I will load one file in each partition and maintain that metadata somewhere in another table, that alright, which file is loaded in which partition. Now I will keep these partitions for 14 days for verification purposes, and then I will go ahead and drop the old partitions and create the new one. So let's see how this process will work. So this is how my metadata table will look like. I receive a file from India on 1st January 2018. I gave it the batch ID 1. This is my metadata table. I received a file from Norway on the same date. I gave it a batch ID 2, from Australia 3 and USA 4. Now this is how my staging table will look like. So I have 3 transactions that happened in India. All those have the same batch ID, and since I have partitioned them, guys, remember in the background this is my segment or my partition. So my table is partitioned on batch ID. I have list partition. So this particular data or this particular batch ID is being stored in a different segment, making it easier to be managed, traversed or dropped. So if you see here, the batch ID 1 is being stored in this yellow segment or partition, while for batch ID 2 is being stored in this blue segment or partition. What are the activities that I'll perform as a part of this process? I will load the data for all the files, one file for each partition. I will drop the data that is older than 14 days. I can do that on a weekly basis or on a daily basis. There are 2 approaches that I can consider for creating partitions. I can create 3000 partitions over the weekend, which I consider more effective, or you can consider creating the partition on the fly. As soon as you receive a file, create a partition, assign it that particular batch ID and store the data. So now let's understand the scenario, why all this is required. As I've explained before, so if the Norway team claims that last Monday they did sale of 100k while warehouse suggests otherwise, go to your metadata table and see that alright, for Monday the batch ID was 2, and based on that batch ID you can use partitioning pruning to actually go ahead and go to your staging table and aggregate the amount very fast and effective. And then you can say that, you know what, though you are claiming that you made this sale of 100k, but that's not the case, it's actually 10k, and that's the file or that's the data we received. So once that dispute is being resolved, you can go ahead and drop that data. So before we end this tutorial, let's quickly recap what we discussed today. The first topic that we discussed was partitioning key. It helps Oracle identifies to which particular partition a row belongs. The second thing we discussed was the error that we may face in case if we try to insert data that does not belong to any partition. How we can rectify that? We can rectify that by creating default partition, and we can use those particular data for reject analysis to identify what's wrong with our process, why we are getting data that does not belong to any partition. Then we discussed when and why we should use list partitioning. If we have predefined list of discrete values and we anticipate that we are going to fetch large amount of data based on those partitioning key, we should go ahead and use list partitioning. Then we discussed list partitioning with the help of two examples. The first was one with region for a retail organization where we had data coming from 3 region: Asia Pacific, North America and EMEA, from different countries. Then we discussed about local and global index. So if the index is being created on the same key as on which the partition is being created or the subset, for example here if we created a bitmap index on the country, then it's a local index. If we are creating an index which is not the part of the partitioning key, then we should consider creating a global index. There is a challenge with global index. If you go ahead and drop a particular partition, the entire global index become unusable. We have not discussed how we are going to tackle with that. We will discuss that in our later video tutorial. Then we came up with this problem statement where we acted as a warehouse manager for a retail organization that was operating in 3 regions and receiving almost 500 files on a daily basis, where we had to retain the data for 14 days in order to make sure that we don't have any reconciliation issues. We actually came up with the solution using list partitioning, and we were creating the partitions over the weekend and dropping them over the weekend or on a daily basis as required. So we discussed quite a few things today, and that too in quick time. Guys, there is a lot more to come, but I'm hoping that by now at least you are getting a feel of it. I hope today you learned something new, and please do drop in case if you have any question regarding to list partitioning or what we discussed today. If you have not already subscribed to my channel, I'll highly recommend that you go ahead and do it now, because there is a lot of fun stuff coming up. Thanks a lot for your time tonight. I'll see you in the next video.